Michelle.
Daniel,
OG
OG
Rose.
Rose, and today, Michelle, what you thinking about?
Well, thinking about lots of different things. Something that's been on my mind has been the nature of friendship and also somewhat familial obligations in an age of globalization and, for the most part, people living in different cities, you know, college, careers, bringing people to different places than often their origins. And so just thinking through, what does it mean to have those obligations? I mean that in the good way, like how to be there for people, show up, things like that, in light of the distance, and maybe it just looks like doing the best you can to do so. I do think that a lot of times when you're growing up and unless you are moved around a whole bunch, which some people do, some people like military families and such, but you're usually kind of around the same people for a good chunk of time. But with things bringing you to different places, you're not logistically in that anymore, but you had a sense of that for many years. So it makes it feel like you're working on a different framework suddenly for how to be with, like I said, be there for your friends, show up for them. And so, yeah, I've just been thinking about that, like thinking through that. I do think that thinking about friendship as something that's tied to actually our virtue and our cultivation helps when I think about this question, because it's less just about your kind of, I mean, yes, we're always subjects in our experience of the world, but like it's not just your subjective opinion what it means to be a good friend in some ways, like in terms of just feelings. Feelings are a part of it, but that's not the only, that can't, well, it can be, you can use that as your only rubric, but I do think you're going to get a little bit like psychologically scattered with that in terms of, and possibly guilt laden, because you're always going to feel like you're not doing enough. You're always going to feel like you're not, because frankly, in some ways, you aren't able to. Well, because we're humans, we have our limitations.
Sure.
But then it's like, oh, maybe you're just not trying hard enough, da-di-da-di-da. But anyways, so this is what I've been thinking about, Daniel. But I do think virtue helps in terms of friendship is actually virtuous, because then the whole point is that it's actually helping you to not ignore your feelings, like recognize your feelings, but also not let them alone be what dictates your decision making. But the whole concept of like the way we know it most of our lives of friendship is kind of like hopefully people who help you feel more alive, like feel better even. So it's not erroneous to think about friendship as it relates to feelings.
Right.
But I do think that like we're kind of lacking in our understanding of friendship sometimes, and how that relates to filial and familial obligation. And so then it's hard to know that you're doing that right, So anyways, those are my thoughts.
No, I think it's a very interesting topic. Well, so there's a few things. So, for most of human civilization, people were relatively close to one another. And also, to say, get food, for example, you'd go to a grocery store. And if you go to the grocery store, you're probably going to run into people in the community and see them. Then if you're going to go to the bank to cash a check, you'd run into people and you would see them. And if your kids were at school, you'd see them. And so the doing of tasks was more embedded in social interaction, right? Well, now you can do online banking. And even if you don't do online banking, your neighbors might. So you don't know. There's just a less probability of running into people. And even if you send your kids to a public school, your neighbor might not, or go to a different school. And so there's more variety in how people do things. So the probability of interaction just naturally occurring as you go about your logistical tasks, they don't cross-pollinate, they don't intersect as much, right? Well, what's very interesting is there's a certain convenience that gave rise to this. Oh, we'll be able to do banking at home. Oh, we'll be able to choose the school we want to go to. Oh, we can order food, or food can be delivered to us. But interesting, it may not have saved time so much, because social interactions then become an additional coordination. So the convenience elements of technological advancement can almost be maybe even made worse, because social obligations increase. And not only, social obligations or social interactions are separated from logistical tasks, right? So you have to do them in addition to the logistical tasks and do additional coordination. Well, that additional coordination is energy, and it takes energy and thought and time to do that coordination. But then also, as you unbind personal interaction from just going about your day doing logistics, you also increase the potential for the number of relationships you could have, precisely because it's not bound by logistics. So you could choose to interact with more people. So there's a double move that happens here that's very interesting. There's an unbinding of relationships from going about your day doing logistical things, which then actually creates more tasks, could create more tasks as you're supposed to be gaining convenience. And then precisely in that unbinding of relationships from the logistics, you can then multiply your relations, because you can go online and find more. You either could end up with no relations,
Right.
or you could end up with a massive explosion of relations, right?
Well,
But if it's a massive explosion of relationships and their energy, they take a lot of energy, well, that could overwhelm you, and you may go to the opposite extreme of no relations. Because I'm very interested in society where we seem to have, it's almost like these two extremes. Either no interaction, no friendship, everyone's on their computer alone, or people have 1,000 Facebook friends. Now, a lot of people would be like, the 1,000 Facebook friends are not real friends. Okay, well, fine, we can talk about that. But there's this idea of this almost this pendulum swinging between completely cut off, or completely overwhelmed with relationships. And perhaps that's because in the unbinding of relations from day-to-day practices, then that either leads to nothing or an explosion.
Well, that's interesting. What you said about the conveniences makes me think of my word play thing, where, whenever you have conveniences, it's usually at the expense of convening.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So that's very true. I agree with that wholeheartedly. The idea of the explosion of relations actually makes me think of, it's true that it can happen simply in the interconnectedness of the web, but I do think college is a good example.
Oh yeah, well, it's a hyper
of that
reality.
explosion of connection.
That's a Baudrillard
where
hyper reality.
you don't have it's weird, because you're, in a sense, you have to sort of in the kind of historical sense of the word of leisure, that's pretty much what college is. And I'm not saying that's for every person. Obviously, there are people who are working 2 jobs and they're trying to pay for their college, and it's leisure would not be the word.
But the idea of the
describe it.
university
But the concept
is scole.
It is. Right. And so therefore you're untethered from many tasks beyond opening up this time to study and learn, right? And so then the main, but the thing is, you're all pretty close. You have that proximity with this little
it creates the
insular
logistic
world
overlapping.
Yeah. But it's not so much on tasks as it is just your class schedules, and these can be they can incur types of tasks.
Yeah.
So I guess it's not inherently non-task oriented. It's just that it's, like I said, it has that layer of the I want to say it's tainted with the fact that it's there for it's leisure, so that you can do these scholarly tasks.
Yeah. But they're logistic coordination. I mean, even if they're not adult responsibilities, I mean, a lot of people in college are stressed, and there are tasks that you're doing. But the point is that, let's put it this way: in college, there's a blending of your social life and your responsibilities. They very easily cross.
Yeah.
In the past, before the digital society, there was more of that as well.
Well, of that, but on a more micro scale, it wouldn't be hundreds and hundreds of people.
Correct.
It would be 20, Yeah, or something like that.
Correct.
In your town, or 100 maybe. You know what I mean?
Correct.
So.
But even in college, I it's probably going to be it's not going to be thousands of people or anything like that.
It's not, but it is an interesting dynamic because, every semester you change classes and you have this, it's a particularly explosive social
absolutely.
period of your life.
There's a compounding that occurs there.
Yeah.
And then I guess to your point, after you leave college, there's a feeling of what do I do with those relationships?
Absolutely. And there is a strange feeling of almost a friend debt that you didn't realize you were incurring while you were there. And it's not like a bad thing, and it's not technically a debt. Nobody's actually calling in that debt or anything like this. And maybe it's not even the right language. But I do think psychologically it can feel like a debt.
Yes.
Because in a way you feel like you maybe, to me, in a way, it's a sense of like you do, in a way, owe these people. Like there's something you feel like you owe people because you did give them your time and energy, and you invested in their life, and so then you're like, now I'm not there with them to see them on a more regular basis, and it's difficult. It feels difficult sometimes, and you don't exactly know what to do about that, and I think you're right that's it. Kind of makes me think of what Jochen said in our talk on Geopadia, Javier, him and I, about like where you just kind of exit. Like I think for some people that psychological tension is just overwhelming, so they just don't have any friends really, and that's what some people may do. And then also just the busyness of life, like you're just trying to survive, you're trying to get your dishes done and your tasks done and make pay your bills and stuff like that. So. But I think that is very disillusioning for a lot of people, honestly.
Well, I think the Baudrillard talks about hyper realities like Disneyland. College, I think, is almost in a sense traumatic for people because you get this hyper reality.
You mean traumatic afterwards?
And then that's right, afterwards, and you're dropped off, and you then are kind of put in this place where the logistics of relationships are not done for you. You have to figure out food. You have to figure out a whole lot of things. And there can be a just sort of reminiscing of how it was. And that's not necessarily a good thing. But I mean, there certainly is something about this idea that there were these relationships, and you were also, a lot of times you're going through college because, quote unquote, that's what you're supposed to do. That's responsible, and you're going through school. And all the while, there's this gaining of people and these kind of relationships. And then as you're trying to just keep your head above water, to do these things, you start going, oh, am I maintaining those? And then some friends can maybe get upset because you're not. And then you can have different agreements on what are the responsibilities of friends, right?
Exactly.
That you may not have known you were signing up for, maybe, or people have different ideas. And then so you got that friend debt, and then you have all of those tensions of people having different expectations of what friendship entails and what it means, that then you are caught up with, and then people go to zero friends. And again, that can possibly occur, and I think the numbers show quite clearly that is occurring with the friend session numbers. I mean, there is absolutely a friend session. The average person, in the book Lost Connections, the average person, if you ask them, who is a close friend you could call right now, most people say 1 or 0. And that's a very profound loss of friendship. And yet, it's very odd because that's occurring simultaneous of this explosion of connection and feeling of friend debts and different things. So there's some piece that's kind of almost seemingly missing, because how can you have, no friend, people not having any friends, but at the same time, this explosion of connection that is going on. And that may be tied to the fact that because people are feeling overwhelmed by the logistics and responsibility of freedom of friends, that of course arise precisely because they're free from being bound to given logistics, because they're born in a town in the 1940s and X, Y, and Z. They can choose things, so everyone chooses different things. So there's a freedom in that, but it also creates more complexity with coordinating relationships. Perhaps what is occurring is that's reaching an overwhelming point for people, or it's feeling too tiring, and so then they just give up and they let the relations fade. I'm not sure, but there's some interesting questions there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that hyper real of college, I mean, it's not, somebody could say, well, it's a neat experience. It's fun. You meet a lot of really cool people, and it's true. It really is. It's almost like when we talk about like The problem is that it's good, right?
Yeah,
like
the problem is it's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not to say it shouldn't happen. It's just that I think people need to be equipped with certain understandings about this whole process, so they're not caught off guard by being like, oh my gosh, I feel like a horrible friend. I feel like I don't have any friends. What happened to my, you get all these existential questions, which are very real, as you're going in through some formative transitions and transformations into adulthood. And it's important. I think it is important to understand, to talk about it, not merely as just criticizing or something, but to like I said, equip people with ways to understand what the dynamic that is occurring. It is occurring for a lot of people. They just may not talk about it. So that then we can understand better about what is friendship, because I do think friendship's very important. Like, it is extremely. Very, very important. Super important. And so if we don't understand these things, it's easy, just like we said, to either just kind of write it off or try not to think about it, or go in the direction of like thoughtless friendships that then also can be just as deadening or whatever.
Well, there's a way in which, in a moment when you have the concept of friendship seems to be in a certain tension, where because it has been split, relationships in general have been split from logistic givenness. Like they're more separate. Your friends are not necessarily the people that you see at the grocery store, that you see at work. They can be coordinated by the internet or from college or all over the world. They can be it's very unbound. So let's just say relationships have been unbound for good and for bad. In that lack of binding, then the possibility space of relationships opens up, and that destabilizes relationships. And in that destabilization, there is the possibility of asking, what exactly are they and what are they for, anew, which before you wouldn't have asked that because they just occurred secondary from going about your tasks, right? But now, in their very optionality, or in their quote-unquote freedom, that invites the question of what are they for? And perhaps the very fact that people are struggling with relationships suggests that we as human beings have not come up with a good answer for this. We don't know what friends are for, actually. We think we do, but we don't. And there's a certain lack, a certain void to this question that has not been addressed. And I think basically people are filling over it and hiding from the lack of knowing the answer to this question with things like guilt or obligation, or simply saying, well, it's good. There's a kind of nervousness, like what you're describing about friend debts or people getting upset or these different kind of obligations. All of these are almost rushing in to try to fill in this void of what exactly a friend is, because we don't know what it is for. That is leading to this social instability that is causing all of these kind of tensions and people feeling guilty or existential or something of that nature.
Yeah, no, for sure. I do think there's something that is necessary about thinking about, like, well, I mean, obligation does have, I think obligation typically kind of gets thought of as like burdensome and placed upon you when it was not something that really even like maybe on principle or something like this. But I do think there is obligation that has a place, and it has to do with friendship, but maybe in a different way than we think, where it's more of an obligation of how you are going to be a mode, right?
Right.
Because then you have a responsibility to cultivate that mode.
Yes.
So that you can be an actual friend to somebody.
Well, the question, I mean, it's almost like you could almost think of Christian theology here. So there's the idea of theologies of guilt that lead to a quote-unquote salvation, or then it's like, well, it's not about guilt, it's about a relationship with Christ. And it's interesting to think that there are similar kind of questions here of that, right? Do you owe friends something? Well, what do we owe them? What is it guilt? Do we owe them something quantifiable? You owe them 1 hour a week. You owe them 1 hour every 2 weeks. It seems once you try to quantify this, it becomes obscene, right? So there's something weird where when it comes to quote-unquote friendship or relationship, there's a feeling of something is owed, but if you try to quantify what is owed, it seems wrong, right?
But there are many people who will think about it in those terms.
But then it's a transaction in algebraic, right?
Yeah.
It's an algorithm,
right.
as
Well,
Jochen was saying.
Right. Well, and that's why I think, again, I think the obligation is more to equality.
Then the question is, what is the quality?
Yeah.
Yeah, it has to be a quality, or else it's a quantifiable and therefore an algorithm, right?
Yeah, exactly. And what's tricky though is like you may have come to that realization where, okay, friendship is actually about the cultivation of virtue, and so that's your standard then is different for what you are doing.
Yeah.
But if somebody still may be in the realm of algorithmic friendship, they may think you're not being a very good friend.
Yeah, they may not.
Even though you are genuinely a friend to them.
Yeah.
But then again, this is where the questions come in. You're like, well, maybe I am not doing enough, and I'm just wanting to sort of say, almost like not call yourself out on it because you're using a different metric or something. But I don't think that other metric is merely for just convenience. Like it is about cultivating a mode, which means that the friendship actually calls you to be greater than you are, like in the sense of it becoming like cultivating a higher version of your,
Well, there's a few things. I mean, even though that's true, this is pluralism, because even if it is the case that it's about equality, how do you hold yourself in light of someone who disagrees?
Because really quick, if we think about this sort of concept of like we talked about, Jock and Javier and I, about the Geopadia, and it was also in the net as well, 154 or something like that. It's interesting because you use the words of like higher version. I don't mean that in like that sounds very hierarchical. It really what I mean to say with that is that friendship that has to do with cultivating virtue is going to demand something of you.
Yes.
But not how many times did you go to tea. I mean, tea's great, but it's about like it's about, it can be about that, and there's nothing, and we shouldn't like hold judgment on that type of seeing that as something that's a valuable thing. But it's certainly not just about the quantity of times and the tally marks of who did what and how many times one visited X place versus Y place, da-da-da. So it has a different standard. It is asking you to face your fears, for example, like actually challenge yourself to be open to real difference, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in this way, it is it is about building character. But the funny thing is, if somebody may be seeing things more in terms of quantification, they may look at that and be like, okay, if I've heard just from the conceptual, I mean, it wouldn't be right to be like, oh, this is making me a better person, because then it's sort of like that defeats the purpose. That's just pride then. But if somebody were to get the concept of it, right, they might be like, well, that's great and all, but how are you being open to me wanting to have a quantifiable value? So it's I don't know. It kind of feels like it's not an impasse per se, but it almost makes me think like, I think this is the same way I feel about when people have concerns with people who do philosophy, right? Because they're like, isn't this supposed to be making you like, this is supposed to be better for you, but you're doing things that concern me. So that it's clearly not making you, but that's because you're not doing the things that they in their algorithmic thinking might be saying you should be doing in order to be successful or whatever, have a good balanced life or whatever it is. Yeah. So I think it's funny because it kind of reminds me of when people like throw God under the bus, when it's like people just fighting with each other. It's like you're pointing at God when it's really the people who are just being people. Anyways, there's a lot there, but I'll just let it go.
Well, if you as Jochen says, if you collapse the beautiful and the good, so what's good for me is the algorithmic, what's good for you is the Geopadia. If there's not the beautiful, we're done. There's an impasse, right? And this is also where if there's not some higher, dare I say, principle upon which all people agree is the point of all things that can break through at any experience, then we do have impasses, and it is all opinion, and therefore pluralism is done. Like it's going to be violence, as Jochen has said, and he is correct. It's just going to be simply... You say friendship is about a quality, I say it's about a quantity, and then there will be violence. Basically, one friend will maybe get more upset than the other, guilt, break it off, like there's going to be some sort of strategy by which to make one party come to the other side, or it will be just collapse, right? So this is the problem of difference, actually. And I mean, the other issue is that the person may get upset because if you say, they go, oh, you're saying friendship is about equality. Well, clearly you're not getting that quality with me. And so then that's something that could be offensive, right? So you have major issues here that beg the question, what exactly are we doing when we talk about friendships or relationships, and what is the point exactly? And ultimately, what this is pointing to is basically to answer the question about the proper way to be a friend. You have to have an entirely different worldview, like an entirely different metaphysics of reality, of which friendship is trying to tap into. So if you don't have that shared metaphysic, and if that metaphysic is not something that's just your opinion, but it has a certain authority over you and all people equally, regardless what your opinion is, well, then it's just a matter of time before you get these impasses and we're in massive trouble, right? And they will break down relationships. And so you could say that, again, the decoupling of relationships from logistics has put relationships, and by relationships, I do think this problem describes marriages too, or spouses, or dating, or friendship. It's all relationships are in this sort of destabilization space. You know, online dating, I mean, it's a different subject. It's not exactly the same, but all of these relationships are in this kind of tension now, where it seems like the dating world is in chaos land, the friendship world is in chaos land. There's all these sort of chaoses. In that very instability, I think it is unveiling a collapsing of the good and the beautiful, to use that language, and it's forcing us to ask, what is this thing? Because the way we've been thinking about it, turns out the way we think about these things were actually simply absorbed from things that simply followed when relationships were conflated with logistics. Like the idea of seeing someone a certain amount of times, well, that would just naturally follow from going to the school and running into those people, or going to the track meets, right? So that kind of linking of regular interaction as a metric and logistics go together.
And like I said, I do think there's something about kind of not holding, there's no judgment for that in a sense, to be able to be amicable and friendly and like be able to have conversation with people is a huge deal. And if you happen to, be doing some regular thing, whether it's school, track meets, taking your kids to an art class, and you see certain people regularly, I hope you are friendly with them. I hope you do kind of have an ability to have conversation with these people, and maybe even come to consider each other friends. Where you may see each other outside of that particular venue, and that's all good and well, and that's a very human and a good. This is like makes me think of what Ross Bird was talking about like our thrownness. Like we should let ourselves be thrown a bit more sometimes, because it's easy to just stay in the bubble of whoever you can just text message or block or whatever. Like we're talking about these easy exits that people have online, where you actually force the world at large is going to kind of give you an opportunity to just figure out how to be friendly with people who you didn't necessarily like curate by some shared interest, so that's important. But I do think that the concept of friendship and what it's for, it's still super important to get right and understand, like get it right in the sense of understand what it really is. The fact that we do have more of this chosen aspect to it now does mean we can either do really bad with that, or we can do something really good with that, because now in a sense we have been given a choice, and that means that we can maybe, as the language that we'll talk about is like, you can maybe make an absolute choice when it comes to friendships.
Absolutely.
And I do think that in our age where you have the possibility of, the great thing about the terms and concepts and sort of juxtaposition, though they're related and both necessary, of the algorithmic and the geopadic, is that these things happen in real life and online. And hopefully the hope is that you can kind of cultivate the geopadic, which then feeds back into your lived experiences to create places of geopadic atmospheres with whoever you encounter. That's the whole point. such an encounter difference.
Well,
difference,
and for those interested on the Geopadic, Michelle, look at the last OG Rose conversation in the net, as you mentioned. Well, and also, too, no one is saying, like, indeed, the seeing people in public interacting well with them, that's extremely important. And that was a real ethical advancement in the human races. Like Dietrich McCloskey would talk about with the bourgeoisie virtues, the interactions of people who were different. And, that's the first book of her trilogy. The issue is, what is the sublation of that?
Yeah.
What is kind of the new that entails the old? Basically, like what ends up happening, because you've been pointing to it, is if we don't start thinking about friendship as cultivating something, then we're going to just be caught in these opinions about what friendship are, and therefore the obligations they entail, and that will almost always turn into power and disagreement and who can assert their will, which, if you think about it, means that in the name of friendship you revert to means that are the opposite of friendship. And that's what keeps happening, and that could be part of the French session, is that we're in an age that finds itself struggling to understand friendship, that then in the friendships that are there, or things like it, they eventually fall into dynamics of trying to define themselves via quantification, which require means that are opposite of what friends do. And so in that self-effacement, it's lost, right? So that requires us to think of what they are cultivating. Like, if friendship is simply relationships with people you like, well, then you've got a few problems, because there could be even a judgmentalism. Like, why'd you pick Fred instead of Bob? Who are you, king of the world, right? So there's kind of this, there's a hierarchy almost innate in friendship if you're not careful, which doesn't seem right. We say, well, we just get along. Well, maybe it'd be good to hang out with people you don't get along with, right? And, doesn't Jesus say it's, sit with the sinners, or different things? So we also have to, I guess what I'm starting to point to is, if we actually look at how we've traditionally arrived at the idea of who our friends are, you may actually notice some things that may border on, dare I almost say, vice sometimes, or at least something that would hinder cultivation. So, for example, a friend is someone who you like. Should you hang out with people that you like? What if that actually weakens you? What if that's tribalism, right? Maybe you should hang out with people you don't like. Well, what human being can do that, though? That seems ridiculous to even say, right? Does someone want to be your friend because you don't like them? That doesn't seem to make any sense. But notice the point I'm getting at is, when you even try to define the question of who should be your friends, if you try to actually think about how you arrive at those, it may unveil some problematic quantifications. It may unveil some sort of problematic problematic quantifications, or ways that you arrived at those decisions. Like, if you ask, why is someone your friend, and you say, well, they're friendly, we have good conversations, they appreciate the work that I do. Oh, that sounds all that could be egotistical, right?
Sure.
Do you see what we're pointing at?
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, that's true. That is very true. I think a lot of, like we were talking about it, especially younger years, a lot of your friendships are just, there's, it's just who you see regularly. So it's, but obviously you gravitate towards certain people over other people, right? For reasons that can't always be explained.
So then it's,
are you suggesting that there's some, well, for me, what it makes me think of, because obviously to make friendships that are purely egoic and that affirm your ego constantly, that wouldn't be good.
Right.
However, I do think there's something about, I don't know, it makes me think of like spirit, right, in the Hegelian sense, or where there does seem to be like something where I do think that there's something that is not just yourself, but that does tap into something that's a part of you, that you're part of, or something like that. That's something that's greater than you, but you're part of it, that then allows you to kind of make these like overlaps.
Sure, but can you quantify that?
No.
But that's the issue. Like, actually, the people we arrive at as friends is through something that's not quantifiable. If it is, it's egoic. So then if we turn around and seek quantifiable metric, like people who want quantifiable metrics, it's in contradiction with the very heart of how friendship is arrived at.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. It's a great point. Because, as you were talking, it's a great point. Because I was thinking to myself, like, well, that's kind of like, it does feel a little absurd. Like, of course you're going to hang out with people you like to be with, right? Versus people you don't like to be with, because they don't want to be with you anyway. That's probably why. So it's like, that's not going to work. But at the same time, why is like a part of the equation in the first place?
Exactly.
Like, because I can also say, thinking about my younger years, I mean, hopefully I could still consider myself young. But the point of the matter is that there are times when I've almost been like, I want to be friends with that person because I think they are cool.
Yes.
And it wasn't like, it's in some ways it's kind of cool. Like, how is that egoic? Aren't you thinking about their ego? But it, things that we like often are a reflection of our own ego, obviously.
Yes.
So, and honestly, to think someone's cool could be nice. Like you want to affirm them and, sort of see them as like a cool person, right? But it's not a great metric in the end, because, well, it can. I mean, I'm not saying it can't ever lead to like a genuine friendship or something like this, but it's risky. Obviously, like, this is just reductionistically the trope of so many movies, right? There's like the cool girls, right? And you want to be friends with them when you first move there, and then you realize, oh no, they're just like mean people. Then you go and make friends with the guy who's into bug collecting or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's just, I think, So it's an important point. It is a really important point. I think that when you take like out of the equation, and this is the hard part. This is the part that's so hard to talk about, because everybody typically does see things in terms of like, for example, if I think about geopadia relationships, and again, do see the conversation I had with Joaquin and Javier, or the net session, it's weird, because it's like, I guess there is some element of it's not, you can't really describe, it's not the right word to use, like.
It's self-forgetful.
Yeah, it's self-forgetful. I mean, it's wonderful. It's amazing. It's beauty.
Yes.
It's beautiful.
Yes.
But in terms of like, do you sort of go around with this little like radar of like, who's the cool person? Who's the cool person? I'm going to go talk to them only. No, you don't do that at all. You just there's just this atmosphere that you find yourself in with that person.
Yes.
In speaking with that person. And you can say, in a sense, you do like that. But it's not as if you went with the little radar of who's cool, or what do I like. And I think, you see this, and I know you said, like, it's true, dating's a little bit of an off topic, but when you do this whole radar for the person you like, this is what couples do, and then they're just like this insular little unit, not talking to anybody else,
Yes.
And it's not, I don't think that's good, because
not at all.
It's well, it's just that, it's insular, and it can become very fragile, ultimately. But anyways, I'll toss back to you, but I think it's an important point, Daniel.
Well, the issue is, okay, so if there's something about geopedic that is self-forgetful, then friendship is at its best when you're not thinking about friendship.
Absolutely.
So the moment you're asking, what are the obligations of a friend, you've lost, right? Like, the moment you're even asking, am I keeping up with my friends, you've lost, because you're making conscious friendship, right? Because, like, there's something
that flies in the face of being intentional, though.
Yes, it does. Because the question is, what should you be intentional about? Should you be intentional about the particular person, or the presence of Holy Spirit, or the presence of Geopadia? This is the issue. Friendship is secondary to Geopadia or Holy Spirit. Like, I was saying to Cadell, like, if you really take seriously Holy Spirit, then our lives don't matter. Like, our friendships don't matter. Like, no one matters but what creates Holy Spirit or Geopadia, right? Like, nothing matters. And when you realize that, then the question of friendship is actually a mode of encounter with people, so that you can meet them in a manner that increases the probability of Holy Spirit. Absolutely. That increases the probability of flow, orbiting form Geopadia, etc., so forth. That increases the probability of escaping the algorithmic, right?
Yeah.
Because the reason, to kind of clarify the point some more, if you actually try to ask why a person is your friend, and you were to start listing the reasons, it almost becomes a vice. It almost becomes bad. Like it's going to just unveil ego.
Is it bad to like things?
Well, but this is the weird thing. No, but then the question is, what kind of like? If you say I like this person because they make me feel good, that seems problematic. Here's the problem. Like can be a threat to virtue.
Absolutely.
In fact, like is always a threat to virtue unless it's attraction to beauty.
Exactly.
This is the key.
Exactly.
Like is a word of goodness.
Yeah.
The sublation is attraction to beauty. So the problem is that you need beauty to sublate like into attraction, or to have the good form of like. If you don't have beauty, then you end up with a like that collapses the beautiful into the good, and the good is an opinion, and thus it is egoic. It is your likes, what you like, right? So this is the issue, is that it is not bad to have likes, but it's bad if you think about likes. It's, if you're thinking about what you like and what you enjoy, as opposed to simply self-forgetfulness, getting lost in the other, in the Geopadia, in the Holy Spirit, well, then you're in trouble, right? So here's the issue. The reason why we're pointing all this out is because there's this idea of, well, what if some people think about friendship as quantifiable, right? Well, we are suggesting that quantifiable metrics of friendship have to fall into the realm of egoic understandings or egoic attraction, or what one is owed. It can't be self-forgetful, right? And if indeed the experience of friendship is more of a self-forgetting, then there seems to be a movement to a mode that is not the friendship in the name of maintaining the friendship. You
Absolutely.
see what I'm saying?
Yes.
And so then that's also where I guess the practical implication of that is basically, if you find yourself in a situation where you have a friend who is using quantifiable metrics and you're trying to maintain that friendship, you're doomed. Like, it's already doomed from the start, and it would be better before years and years of exhaustion or the mental torment or whatever to just take that head on and to confront it, as opposed to be turning that wheel to keep it going, because that's probably just ultimately going to fail, and well, it will fail and lead to self-effacement and pathologies and different things, right? What instead needs to occur is a shifting of focus from trying to meet quantifiable metrics or algorithmic metrics of friendship, and instead cultivate the ability to create experiences of Holy Spirit, to create experiences of Geopadia, to create qualities of experience that, well, here's the other thing. If you create those qualities of experience, it almost seems like it's not you really don't have a say if this person has a kind of friend relationship to you, because that experience itself is authoritative. Like, you don't get to say, if these people that you're with create Geopadia, it's not really your opinion if these people are more than just associates. They clearly are capable of creating the conditions of Holy Spirit. So there's something interesting that also occurs when you think the beautiful Holy Spirit Geopadia, is that the question of who are my friends kind of vanishes. You don't really get to say, these people create that effect. That's just a fact. Therefore, they are your quote-unquote friends. Right? Because there's another issue here where, if we're thinking about friends in terms of who you consider your friends, now it just depends on what we mean by that. That's not inherently a bad question. But there's also, right there, it's in the realm of, well, your preference and what you think, right? But like you're saying with Giacomo Javier or Stumping Grounds or different things, when simply you go into a space and there is a effect, it's not really your opinion. You don't get, you have a unique relationship with these people.
Yes.
It's not your opinion. It's just there. And so that also removes the question of deciding who your friends are a bit from you. And then retrospectively, you can identify friendship. You can identify relationship. But there's also a very interesting way where beauty and the Holy Spirit and Geopadia it kind of removes the question from you. And if you're also primarily in a mode of self-forgetfulness about friendship, then you're going through life in a manner that's open to the possibility of the other that you encounter being a condition that creates Geopadia. And then the very experience of that quality does the decision for you, per se. This is someone of friend quality. This is someone of geopedic quality. So that removes the questions of debt and obligation, et cetera, so forth.
Yeah, no, that's all very good. That's all very good. And I think it's all very true what you're saying. I wonder if, so, I mean, it depends on people's like living circumstances, but I do think that maybe it's also helpful because to have the clarification of what you were just saying, where you really do allow the question of friendship to actually not be answered in a sense, like not directly.
You let the experience provide the answer almost in a way.
Well, then too, like logistically, your neighbors are your neighbors. Like if they need something, you help them out. You know, I mean that's at least the way that we are able to live. And
but that experience can give the friend. If the neighbor needed help and you went and cut down the tree, then the very doing of that says that there's a quality of the relationship there, right? So the logistics can help you deal with, is this a friend or not question, right? As opposed to your own egoically decided metrics or something like that, right?
Yeah, well, it's almost better if it's like it is your neighbor, right? Or the experience of Geopadia versus it just being like, who do I think of as my friend? You know,
well, you're in huge trouble if you're asking that question because you're just going to fall into opinion.
Yeah, definitely.
But then, of course, the question is, I mean, the issue is this: how, if you cannot create the effects or if you cannot experience Geopadia, then basically the question of friendship is indeed, it falls back in a Hegelian sense on your opinion, right? And if it's in the realm of your opinion or decision, there's all the existential tensions you're describing, right? So you have to keep it from falling back in that. Well, this, you were mentioning virtue. This is why cultivating virtue is a very big deal. Because if you can cultivate virtue, then you're cultivating the conditions by which friendship can be done for you by the possible experience of Geopadia, right? But if you don't have virtue, or you haven't gained those capacities, then the question is going to have to stay in the realm of opinion. You're not going to be meeting the conditions necessary for the strike of beauty, for the Geopadia, for Holy Spirit, right? So, and then of course, friends in Geopadia create more virtue, which create more Geopadia, so it becomes a feedback loop, right?
Well, I think this can be, like, I guess I brought up the neighbors thing because sometimes people who, I don't know, maybe don't, like, it's a funny concept. I mean, it's not that like crazy today in our day and age, but the idea of like, oh, you have these people who you talk with online, and it's hard to really say what that is to people who don't know what that's like, because they're like, again, like you said, and I agree, I feel it too, where it's funny, it's not that you wouldn't say they're your friends. They are your friends in like the deepest sense, but you really don't think about it that much. you know, it's not, until you are asked, right? Or you have to sort of explain it to somebody else. You don't typically use that language. Or think about it in those terms of those lines.
Because you're self-forgetful in the beautiful.
Right.
You're in the thing, right?
Right, exactly. You're just in the thing, so you don't really think about it in terms of friends, which then also lets all of the expectations, like you're saying, all of that falls away, and then it gets to just be what it is. Which is a very beautiful thing. But when you try to explain it to other people, then you're kind of like, oh yeah, my friends who, the best way you can put it often is just like, oh, friends you do philosophy with, or something like this. I guess I'm just thinking of, a friend from online that I would say met through the philosophy circles. We were talking about this topic a little bit, in real life or online communities or friendships, and this person asked a great question where it's like, should the relationships that you have the relationships that you have online can give you a great quality of I don't know, what's the right word here? They can give you a great quality of an enrichment for the sake of a mutual enrichment, right? Should it be the case that the they are more than your in real life friendships or not. I mean, to me, the thought is that this is where this whole idea of actually being somewhat untethered gives opportunity, because you can meet people who are like, oh, they're willing to ask questions, they're willing to be challenged, they're willing to entertain things that they don't believe, for example. You may not necessarily find that in your lived experience, though you can still have you can still cultivate the environment of Geopadia to offer to anyone you encounter in your lived experience.
Yes.
And you can still be a good neighbor. You can help them when they need to cut the tree, and that you can help them with this, that, and the other. But what I mean to say is that it can seem strange for people who have not experienced what we're talking about in this online realm, even though Geopadia is not just an online phenomenon. It is actually an in real life phenomena. It's just that it can sometimes be, you can have the social coordination mechanism that allows it more so through that. But I think maybe the thought is, well, that's great. Shouldn't that sort of thing be able to happen in real life to try to get this a little bit more distilled?
It should, but it doesn't, because you have to meet the conditions, and the education system has to, and you have to cultivate the humanities, and we're under the tyranny of pragmatism and algebra. So the problem is that very, 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 very few people on planet Earth are meeting the conditions for its experience. So what has happened is people have had to go online to find the 0.001% of the planet that does it, which if those people coordinate together, they're able to create the effect. But simply because of the logic of the age, it has been remarkably difficult. The universities are not creating it anymore. They failed. Okay, churches have failed. So
right, because I was going to say, maybe there are these other places that used to be much more logistically centralized for people that they could maybe experience it there.
But you could argue that after 1950s or whatever, that everything has gone in the direction of efficiency. The the algorithm has taken over, and so now you have these people who probably went through college feeling alone because they, were trying to actually do real thought, and the professor shut them down, or they got kicked out of the business. So you got to see a lot of these people online
aren't just trying to escape things.
They would have happily done the Geopadia in their real life experience if it was there. It's not that they wanted it not to be there. It's just the problem is it's very rare. And so, but the internet, in the way we use it, has created a social coordination mechanism where the 0.001% of the planet that does it can coordinate and find one another, which then creates Holy Spirit. And then, and here's the issue: if you don't have Holy Spirit you certainly can't give it to the people in your immediacy. So it's not like and ultimately, if at the end of the day, actually the point of relationships, which we're alluding to, is about Holy Spirit, Geopadia, it is not about feeling good or anything, it's ultimately about creating that, then there is zero virtue in having real world experiences if they do not create Holy Spirit. Like, if you take this very, very seriously, then this idea of online are not as good as real world, well, no, there's only one criteria, actually, at the end of the day, for every relationship. Does it create Holy Spirit or not? Does it create Geopadia or not? And if the answer is it does not, then on what basis are you saying that these relationships are more or less real, right? Like, there's a certain prejudice that is saying that the in real life are more real relationships than the online. By what standard?
Well, but can't we say that? That's true, and it's very true what you're saying. Can't we say that, though, because of our particular moment in history? Because people could say, that's fine and true, except what if what if tree goes down on your shed and now you need somebody to help you cut up the tree, and like,
of course, but Geopadia, I would say the conditions of Geopadia are historically bound in an age of, say, and I think I would follow Haeckel's phenomenological journey, as Cadell says, is in an age that is primarily, say, spirit. The conditions of Geopadia are different than when it's primarily religious, and they are different than when it is an age of absolute knowing. And in an age of, say, religion, then yeah, the Geopadia is probably going to be found in the cutting down the tree and the people in your immediacy and the harvest festivals, or et cetera, so forth.
But that's
right?
why you could sublate it, right? That's why we're saying.
That's why we're
not,
saying we're sublated.
Right. It's not that you don't
But
do those.
but
things
the issue
too.
is that if this is an age that requires absolute knowing, which is the philosophical consciousness that handles Holy Spirit in Geopadia, that is absolute knowing. Happy to go into that. Then if this is an age of absolute knowing, then basically what that means is previous ways of finding the Geopedic no longer are, because they've been usurped, say, by capital.
Yeah.
People don't, like, here's the issue. Okay, yeah, your neighbor's tree gets cut down. You think your neighbor's calling you? They're calling the tree expert. It's all gone to the expert class, as Ivan Illich says. It's gone to professionals. You're not going to go over there because of liability reasons. So these examples of helping your neighbor, like, I get it, like the idea of helping your neighbor when they have trouble. How many times do you help your neighbor? Like, how many times does your neighbor actually call for you? In the past, I think, a lot. But the problem is you can't ignore how capitalism and the professional class and occupations have swept in there to have neighbors not calling on one another for help. Neighbors tend to hang out, okay? And that's all well and good, but the issue is people don't even know how to hang out. What do? They watch a movie. They consume something together, which again is another example of the logic of capitalism. So the truth is that most real life relationships now are under the logic of the algorithm. And as long as they are primarily under the logic of the algorithm, they do not create Geopadia. And so then it doesn't make much, it would be invalid to say that they are better than the online.
Sure. And I think, there's a part of me that's like, oh no, that sounds quite Gnostic, to be honest. But that's not true, because the thing is that people who through online, they are real people. They are
and
real,
you meet them in real life.
Yeah, you meet them in real life. They have real bodies.
The question is... The question is the prioritization of the online. It's not that they're just digital. You meet and they gain you capacities you can then use in the real life encounters, right? The question is the allocation of time, not if you're going to just do online or just do in real life. Yeah. The question is if the online is training the Geopedic, and the point of relationships is actually the Geopedic, or ultimately it falls back on egoic quantifications. Well, then we should be prioritizing the online precisely for the sake of the real life relationship, so that when you encounter people in real life, you're actually able to offer a way of being that would show them an alternative to, say, the logic of consumption or capital or entertainment that defines most hanging out now, right? Yeah. Like, you can actually have the skills and capacities to, quote-unquote, hang out in a way that is more like scole in leisure, in the Piper sense, and thus fully human, right? So, again, if the whole point of relationships is Holy Spirit, well, then that's all you should really think about, and what is cultivating that or not. Otherwise, you end up in just these random sort of hierarchies of, is it a real-life relationship or is it a digital? Is it did you meet with them 5 times a week or only 2? All these kind of you're looking for quantifications, because in a way, digital versus real is a quantification. Like, what percentage of real life interactions did you have versus digital, right? Now, I don't deny that there's a danger to the digital in the sense of you never bring it into the real. But that's why we're doing this digital in real life events, because when you do the in real life, that's when you run into difference, and that's where you find out if the stuff you're doing online is actually manifesting into real change as subjects, right? So the real interactions, the in-person interactions, are the test. They're the confirmation. They're necessary, but the thing that you're testing is what is primarily the Geopedic, right? So you can't really test anything if you don't have the Geopedic, right? So the cultivation of that has to be primary in the thinking.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, though, like, and I mean, you already touched on it, the risk of the digital not being brought into the real life. I mean, maybe it can... Yeah. I mean, I think that's all very, very true. I think that, I wonder if I know we talked about, like, intention and how there's risk in that, right? Because we were talking about, like, this being intentional with friendship can kind of make you not in this mode of self-forgetfulness with it. But is this where people should maybe allow themselves to be part of, like, whether it's a weekly church or weekly, bowling club or weekly, writing club or Spanish club, to sort of force them to be, now I think, like, we if you're in a certain logistics where you're kind of around family, or you have a couple of friends who, or you're, you kind of you sort of have things that bring you together on somewhat of a regular basis, this can be good and helpful, and almost sort of, in a way, you plugged yourself into that dynamic, right? I guess I'm just speaking to a lot of the people who don't have that. They're in an apartment, or they might be in a place that they aren't in a grounded situation. So then, grounded in the sense of just plugged into some sort of logistical coordination that makes them see people on a regular basis. I mean, I don't know. There's a part of me that's almost like, I don't know, just joining some weekly club for the sake of it. Maybe you just have to be self-discerning. Maybe you do need to do that. But I don't know if you have to do that necessarily either.
I mean, I would certainly encourage putting yourself in the midst of people. Like, if you are, even little things where instead of working in your apartment, go work in a library or in a coffee shop, even those little steps can be very, very good.
Having some people who become like regular people you see, like a regular. It's like
it's not. It depends. It just depends. I think if there is something about where the real life is necessary to actually, so let's say you're doing these online communities to cultivate geopedic capacity. But then if you don't ever put yourself in places of the real life, you never test to confirm those capacities. So it is important to make sure you do that.
Yeah.
How exactly you do that, there are different ways.
I do think, though, generally speaking, that the geopedic, you tend to find that these are people who are pretty well versed in both arenas.
Yes,
in the sense that they're not like people who can't go to the cashier register and order at Panera, or like
they're not addicted to World of Warcraft on the video game console all night. Yeah.
No, like they're not completely virtual. Not that anyone's a completely virtual subject, but they're not like just, oh, I'm not gonna talk to the the whole reason why they may, like you're talking about, it's a very reciprocal relationship of cultivating oneself through these conversations and extended I guess mediations and opportunities to reflect, write, think, talk, so that when you go back to your job or your girlfriend or whoever it is that you and the people you see at work, like that you actually that you have equipped yourself better.
I do wonder.
I do think so. I think you tend to see that, like, there are people who seem pretty much in both worlds. Does that make sense?
I do wonder if the idea, if it's a kind of false problem sometimes. If you are using the internet geopedically, I would certainly bet that you're doing real life relationships better than most, and that there is not this problem of sacrificing in real life for the digital. I mean, also too, there can almost be a romantic. We also have to be careful. So there's a few things. First, I think people who are using the internet geopedically are then asking questions about the digital with the, say, video game addict in mind. Like, there's this kind of, in their mind, those get conflated of the subject.
The person sleeping in the VR chat.
Yeah, that's correct. Like, this conflation of the individual who is using the internet geopedically with someone who might just be addicted to the computer.
Yeah. These
things get conflated, but I don't think they're the same kind of subject, actually. But there's a worry that they might be. And that's something that I question. I think also, I guess what I was going to say is there can sometimes be maybe a romanticization of how often people in history have, like, is it the case that people at every moment were outside interacting with the community or different things? They probably had 5 hours at night where they're just at home eating dinner or working at things. Or in the 90s, people were, I know Postman critiques the TV, but there have always been blocks of time where people are more alone, right? So basically, if people are using the internet for Geopadia, they could just be using those blocks of time to do that are not necessarily at versus something else.
Watching the baseball game.
Versus watching the baseball game or something. Or, maybe the time it took to get on a horse and go to town to meet people or to go to church could have taken hours. And now you have extra time that you're just using for the Geopadia, right? So it's kind of interesting because there's this talk now that we no longer have solitude. But then there's also this talk now that we don't have the social. So there's this idea in the past that people had more solitude. Well, that would mean they had less social, right? So there could just be a reshuffling of the deck, right? And we just have to be careful to over-romanticize how often and how long people in the past were socially interacting. We also have to be careful to over-romanticize the amount people socialize, like saying more socializing with people in real life is better than less, right? Well, that's a quantifiable number.
Yeah.
There are teachers who you have 5 classes with and they change your life forever. The quality of the social interaction is actually more important for how a person forms than a quantifiable amount, right? For good and for bad. If you have a single bad social interaction, it can be a disaster, right? So those are just a few things I think we have to be careful about. That sometimes in the conversation about digital versus real life, there may just be some romanticizing that is occurring, also kind of conflation in the mind of the geopedic with the guy who's playing Warcraft all night.
No, that's super important. That's very helpful. That's very helpful. The brain, it's probably just the brain tends to totalize. So it's thinking, oh, you do online stuff. You must only do online stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
When really you do a whole lot of other stuff that's not
online at all.
You're barely, you're really not online a lot,
Right.
But you do emails and you have correspondence through online.
Yes.
And some of your most, what you would, if you were to have to be asked point blank, like some of your most significant relations, they may be online.
Yes.
Or at least that origin is. You might know them now in real life in physical spaces, but may not share the same town or whatever.
Yes.
But just because of that, doesn't mean that you're an incel, like somebody who just like lives on the internet all the time,
Well, I mean, what if someone today had a pen pal?
Well, I was just thinking that. I was like, it kind of makes me think of like having shared a moment in history, some time.
Yes.
And then you moved away. Like,
yes.
My family immigrated, I've moved states within the United States. And it's like, is it any less real that you had a certain relation that might be very deep and profound and important in your life just because you live in different countries now? No.
Correct.
Well,
I guess also, like, maybe people in the past, people had pen pals and be like, you need to have real life relationships instead of this pen pal, right? Yeah. But today, I bet if someone was a pen pal, we'd be like, wow, that's a real relationship. Cool.
You've got a real person you write letters to.
Like, that's so great. It's not digital, right? So we also, there are certain biases there, right? Like, it's actually incredible when you see how much letter writing people did in the past. Like, someone they would work on letters 2 hours a day sometimes, just like letter writing. And I think about a lot of times these people online are 2-hour classes. Okay, well, that's just your letter writing for the day, right? I mean, the other thing I would say that I would also just point out here is that when you go back in history, like a lot of the quote unquote, I want to say aristocrats or intellectuals, they did spend a remarkable amount of every day doing correspondence, maintaining letters. Like the, leaders, rulers, kings, a role of ruling classes or aristocracies was often, the politics, interaction, communicating, social, right? There's a way in which now that role that perhaps intellectuals, aristocrats, or whatever in the past did is now democratizing, and where
like
more
it's democratized.
Yeah, it's democratizing in the sense of the everyday person is more and more finding themselves in the place of part of their job is correspondence, emails and conversations online. Like diplomacy, like in a sense, right? Like the role. There has always been people who's basically had jobs that's highly just correspondence or diplomacy or letter writing.
Yeah.
And what's happening is more and more the average person is finding himself in a place with that where they have a job like an aristocrat in the past.
Yeah.
And part of their work is maintaining relationships. And the way the aristocrats did that in the past was letter writing, or they'd have conversations and then the person would go back to France and then they would see them 2 months later. That kind of I'm just calling it aristocratic because I'm not sure what else to call it right now. That sort of aristocratic duty that you would see in history, or Lewis writing letters all day. Part of the social coordination mechanism and what we're seeing online is that more and more people are finding themselves in a place of having that kind of job. And we're saying, it's taking them out. And we're saying it's taking them out of real life relationships. I think maybe what we want to say, I think more of what's almost happening is that the average person is getting more almost aristocratic duties. And aristocrat might not be the right word because people hear that and they think upper class, but it's what aristocrats have done in history.
But I think like that's fair because of technology. We've all been elevated to like that. But
we've been elevated to less labor.
We don't have to do the intensity of labor that most people had to do for much of human history.
No.
So everybody's kind of been opened up a bit. Like
that's why I think it's okay to say, because there is something about the average person that is more aristocratic. Even if they have a blue collar job, even if they have no time energy, there's still something about technology that in its convenience, because convenience and the aristocrat go together.
Right,
So in the convenience of technology, more and more the average person is finding themselves quote unquote aristocrat. And at least in this sense, and a job of the aristocrat was communication. And if we take that seriously, is the letter writing of the aristocrat a real life relationship? It's more like a duty. It's more like a responsibility that they're holding to. And I guess what I would just say is I think the right way to think of the online is almost like the duty of the Geopadia. It's the duty of you're doing your duties. Okay, we have this aristocratic way of life and we got to do our duties to maintain our relationships and correspondence and diplomacy to make sure there's the Geopadia. And once we're done with that, okay, then we go outside. But it's more duty based. And I do think once you get Geopadia and Holy Spirit, you start thinking about you really do. There's almost like there is a duty. There's a fidelity. It's your responsibility to maintain these relationships. It's not just because you like it. It's your responsibility, because the whole point of all this is Holy Spirit. And so it's your responsibility. And I think that's what when you ask the question of do you like it, goes out the window. It's more like, there's a kind of responsibility to Holy Spirit in the Geopadia. That I don't think is far at all from how the quote unquote aristocrat thought about it. Do I like this person I'm writing a letter to? That's a weird question. It's just what I'm supposed to do. There's a responsibility to it.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think the beauty of the Geopadia is it shows that there's kind of a sort of this role and also experience that is that does really it really does provide almost like a different level of engagement, or I don't know how to describe it. It's sort of like a different ballpark, I want to say, for human engagement. I wonder if we kind of relate that back to the aristocrat back in the day, right? If that would have been, would it, I don't know, maybe it's just like, no, they were just the duties that have to be done for X, Y, and Z estates to be managed and the politics to be taken care of, but
for the sake of social capital.
Okay, so maybe it wouldn't be for Geopadia as we're talking about it.
It was. I mean, without this stuff, there's no civilization. The society falls apart.
It's a part of the
process. It's absolutely
then.
Important.
Yeah.
Look, if you don't have diplomacy, we're in World War III. So, this kind of stuff
is... So Geopadia has if we think about it on almost a more of a macro scale, huge. It has a huge role, and it has these. This is why too. Jochen will say it's not to get rid of the algorithmic. It's to think about their relationship.
Yes.
So that
it's a sublation.
Yeah, it's a sublation. It's so that they can actually work very well together, well together for everybody's benefit. Yeah. Even if people who wouldn't say they, you don't have a clue of what we're talking about or what that means, or if they haven't experienced it. Though the cool thing about it is it's undeniable in the experience of it. Though Javier does talk about how it can also destroy people because they don't know what to do with it. They're like, I don't know, this is crazy, and it can maybe be very unsettling to people who aren't necessarily ready for that level of engagement. Not because anyone's like smarter, but just because you've cultivated a certain type of openness to difference for an extended period of time.
Yes.
To the place where you can hold lengthy conversations about things that you're able to hold. You can hold that.
Yes.
But anyways, yeah. So I guess I was just thinking about that in terms of the aristocrat. Were they doing that type of correspondence for something that was geopedic in its quality, or maybe so in a different way?
At that moment in history, yes. For what that historic moment called for, absolutely.
Absolutely. And we can't know for sure, but maybe that really did even afford like a types of geopedic friendship that we're talking about.
If you're looking 100%. At the Bloomsbury group with all the
absolutely,
letters they're exchanging.
Yeah. Definitely, 100%. Yeah.
So I'll call it aristocratic responsibility. So what
I just had a scene of like the guy at his desk writing,
Yes.
and he steps away, and then somebody's like, nobody would think that him at his desk is not being in the real world, even though he's writing to people in France and China.
That's my point.
Whatever,
it's just that there's a bias we have. That what is happening is that the average person is finding themselves in a position for quote-unquote aristocratic responsibilities. These are the responsibilities of diplomacy, of democracy, of culture, of running the society, of creating social capital. These little aristocratic responsibilities are arteries, blood flow of civilization that make a massive difference and keep you out of wars and create culture and create the next great novel, and I could go on, right? So in a sense, global pluralism is a world in which, because people are encountering difference, they more so find themselves with aristocratic responsibilities to maintain relationships and also to figure out how to interact with difference, which is diplomatic. They're trying to be diplomatic. You're trying to figure out the right people to be around, to think the problem, to kind of create networks. Like what's happening is more and more people are finding themselves in the role of, again, aristocratic responsibility. And so a way to think about this whole question of the digital and the real is the digital is a space of aristocratic responsibility in a world of global capital and global pluralism and the global brain, as Goodell talks about. And there is something where, in order to deal with the problem of pluralism, more and more people and more the average person is finding themselves with aristocratic responsibilities. That is part of gaining the kind of subjectivity that can hold difference.
Yeah.
Because an aristocrat learns the whole difference. A diplomat learns the whole difference between nations, right? So you're learning how to correspond between different people group. You're learning how to talk between different language games, you're moving between different social worlds. This is what you're doing in the social coordination space in the para-academic world. So I think for me, once you look back on history and you realize, a lot of people spend a whole lot of time with quote-unquote aristocratic responsibilities that we today would say, they were maintaining real-life responsibilities. No, they're sitting at their desk. They're doing all of this correspondence. That's why isn't that disembodied? And these people were accused of, being quote-unquote disembodied, or you will, or just being in their office all day, right? Well, they were doing that because that was necessary for culture making.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? That's, I think, the proper way to think about the social coordination mechanism. If we think of it as digital relationships versus real relationships versus aristocratic responsibilities
and correspondence
and aristocratic responsibilities and then communal responsibilities, because those are the two categories. You have your aristocratic responsibilities and then your communal responsibilities, or you could say analog responsibilities, or your daily responsibilities. There might be different ways to languages. Quotidian. That's fine. Then basically,
I always like that word.
If you think of it that way, then what's going on today isn't that different from what has happened in the past. The difference is that the amount of people with aristocratic responsibilities is increasing, and it's increasing to the everyday man. Because of the convenience of technology, and because there is something about the aristocratic lifestyle in this sense that is the working with difference, that is the working with relationships around the world, that is this working with culture making, etc., so forth. And I think that can free you from thinking this question of digital relationships, online relationships, and then also it helps you think being a steward of something. You're stewarding something, and what you're stewarding is the Geopadia, and what you're stewarding is Holy Spirit, and that also helps you become self-forgetful when it comes to friendship, which then helps you escape quantification that leads to, well, existential tension, etc., so forth.
No, that's all great, Daniel. Yeah.
Well, so aristocratic responsibilities. Yeah.
Think about that movie now.
Oh yeah.
Aristocats.
Oh, the aristocrats. I thought you were going to say Downton Alley or something.
Oh,
like
Downton.
I couldn't say it. Or Jane Austen or something.
Well, no, I've been thinking about Pride and Prejudice the whole time.
Well, there you go. It worked out. Well, for more, not Pride and Prejudice, but OG Rose. Yeah. Please visit ogrose.com, Twitter, Anchor, Instagram,
yes.
Amazon, books. All purchases, reviews are greatly appreciated. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.